10 books that were banned for revealing too much throughout history. Some books have been so powerful, so revealing, that governments and institutions tried to silence them completely. These weren't just controversial stories. These were books that exposed secrets, challenged power, and threatened to change the way people think. And the people in charge? They were terrified. Today we're going through 10 books that were banned because they revealed too much. Books that governments didn't want you to read. Books that exposed corruption, revealed hidden truths, and challenged the very foundations of society. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these books were so dangerous that people in power had to make them disappear. Let's start with a book that almost got its author executed. In 1962, a book appeared in the Soviet Union that would shake the entire communist system to its core. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn wasn't just a novel. It was a window into a world that the Soviet government had spent decades trying to hide. The book tells a story of a single day in a Soviet labor camp. Just one day. 24 hours in the life of a prisoner named Ivan Denisovich. But in those 24 hours, Solzhenitsyn revealed what millions of people had experienced but were never allowed to talk about. Here's what you need to understand. During Stalin's rule, millions of Soviet citizens were arrested and sent to labor camps in Siberia and other remote areas. These camps were called the Gulag. People were sent there for almost nothing. Maybe they told a joke about Stalin. Maybe they criticized the government in a private conversation. Maybe someone just didn't like them and reported them to the secret police. In these camps, people worked in freezing temperatures, barely had enough food to survive, and lived in horrible conditions. Many died, but the Soviet government never admitted these camps existed. They were a state secret. Anyone who talked about them could be arrested and sent there themselves. Solzhenitsyn knew all about these camps because he spent 8 years in them. He had been a captain in the Soviet army during World War, but after the war he was arrested for writing private letters that criticized Stalin. Just letters to a friend. For that, he got 8 years in the Gulag. When he finally got out, he started writing about what he experienced, but he couldn't publish it. It was too dangerous. The government would arrest him again, maybe execute him this time. So he wrote in secret, hiding his manuscripts. Then something unexpected happened. After Stalin died in 1953, a new leader named Nikita Khrushchev came to power. Khrushchev wanted to distance himself from Stalin. He started a period called de-Stalinization, where some criticism of Stalin was allowed. Solzhenitsyn saw an opportunity. He submitted his manuscript to a literary magazine, and against all odds, Khrushchev himself approved it for publication. The government thought they could control the narrative. They thought publishing one carefully chosen book would show they were open and reformed while still maintaining control. They were wrong. When One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich was published, it created a sensation. People lined up outside bookstores. The book sold out immediately. Everyone wanted to read it because everyone had heard whispers about the camps. Everyone knew someone who had disappeared. No one had ever been allowed to talk about it openly. The book described the reality in simple, clear language. It showed prisoners fighting over scraps of bread. It showed them working in -40-degree weather with inadequate clothing. It showed the casual cruelty of the guards and the desperate strategies prisoners used just to survive one more day. What made the book so powerful was its honesty. Solzhenitsyn didn't exaggerate. He didn't need to. The truth was horrible enough. He showed that these weren't just criminals in the camps. They were ordinary people. Farmers, soldiers, people who had done nothing wrong except live in a system that could turn on anyone at any moment. The Soviet government quickly realized their mistake. This book was revealing too much, was making people question the entire system. If the government could do this to millions of innocent people, what else were they lying about? Within a few years, the government tried to put the genie back in the bottle. They stopped publishing Solzhenitsyn's work. They harassed him. Okay, they tried to silence him again, but it was too late. The truth was out. Solzhenitsyn went on to write even more revealing books, including The Gulag Archipelago, a massive 3-volume work that documented the entire history and system of Soviet labor. That book was banned immediately in the Soviet Union. Possessing a copy could get you arrested. The government expelled Solzhenitsyn from the country in 1974, but his books kept circulating. People made illegal copies and passed them around in secret. They were smuggled across borders. published in other countries and broadcast back into the Soviet Union on radio. The government couldn't stop it. Why was this book so dangerous? Because it exposed a fundamental lie. The Soviet government claimed to be building a paradise for workers, a fair and just society. But Solzhenitsyn showed that the government was running a massive system of slavery and murder. He revealed that the communist dream was built on the bones of millions of innocent people. When a government's legitimacy depends on a lie, anyone who tells the truth becomes a threat. That's why they banned this book. That's why they tried to silence Solzhenitsyn, because the truth he revealed was more powerful than any propaganda they could create. Now let's talk about a book that exposed what the American government was doing to its own citizens. In 1976, a book called The FBI's War on Freedom of Speech came out, but you probably know it by a different name. Books about FBI surveillance and government overreach had been circulating, but one particular collection of documents changed everything. Actually, let me tell you about something even more specific. In 1971, a group of activists broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania. This wasn't just any robbery. They specifically targeted the FBI's files. What they found and leaked to newspapers changed American history. The documents revealed a program called COINTELPRO. This stood for Counterintelligence Program. The FBI had been running it since 1956, and almost nobody outside the FBI knew it existed. Here's what COINTELPRO did. The FBI secretly spied on American citizens. They infiltrated political groups. They spread lies to destroy reputations. They sent fake letters to break up marriages. They blackmailed people. They even drove some people to suicide. Who were they targeting? First, it was the Communist Party, but then it expanded. Civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, women's rights groups. Anyone who criticized the government or challenged the status quo became a target. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most famous civil rights leaders in American history, was a major target. The FBI bugged his hotel rooms. They recorded his private conversations. They sent him anonymous letters trying to convince him to kill himself. Yes, the FBI tried to drive Martin Luther King Jr. to suicide. They wrote him a letter that basically said his affairs would be exposed unless he committed suicide before receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. This wasn't just one rogue agent. This was a systematic program approved at the highest levels of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI for nearly 50 years, personally oversaw many of these operations. The FBI also targeted the Black Panthers, a political organization fighting for black rights. They didn't just spy on them. Oh, they actively worked to destroy them. They planted fake evidence. They had police raid their offices. They even helped facilitate the assassination of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton. The FBI gave the Chicago police a floor plan of Hampton's apartment and drugged him beforehand so he couldn't fight back when police burst in and shot him while he slept. The media documents were leaked and published. The government tried to stop newspapers from printing them. They claimed it was a matter of national security, but newspapers published them anyway. And when the public read these documents, they were shocked. This was the American government spying on its own citizens. This was the FBI acting like a secret police force. This violated the Constitution. This violated everything America claimed to stand for. Books and articles documenting COINTELPRO started. The government tried to downplay it. They tried to justify it. They said it was necessary to fight communism and protect national security. But people weren't buying it. Congress launched investigations. They found that COINTELPRO had targeted over 20,000 people. The FBI had 1,500 active operations going at one point. They had infiltrated hundreds of organizations, and they had done all of this without any oversight, without any warrants, without any legal authority. The revelations led to new laws restricting what intelligence agencies could do domestically. It led to the creation of congressional committees to oversee the FBI and CIA. It fundamentally changed how Americans viewed their government. But here's the thing. While COINTELPRO officially ended in 1971 when it was exposed, many people believe similar programs continued under different names. FBI and other agencies just got better at hiding them. Books documenting COINTELPRO were controversial for years. Some libraries refused to carry them. Some schools banned them. The government didn't officially ban these books because in America, official censorship is harder to do. but they worked to suppress them in other ways. They questioned the patriotism of people who wrote or read them. They suggested these books were helping America's enemies. Why? Because these books revealed that the American government, which claimed to be a beacon of freedom and democracy, was secretly acting like the authoritarian regimes it criticized. The books showed that constitutional rights could be violated by the very institutions supposed to protect them. They revealed that the government feared its own citizens enough to spy on and sabotage them. The truth in these books was too dangerous to ignore. It changed how a generation of Americans viewed their government, and it showed that even in the democracy, power can corrupt, and those in power will try to hide their crimes. Let's move to a book that revealed the horrors of war in a way governments desperately wanted to hide. In 1929, a German novel hit bookstores across Europe. All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque became one of the best-selling books of the time. Within a year, it had sold millions of copies and been translated into dozens of languages. The book told the story of young German soldiers in World War I, but it didn't tell the story the way governments wanted it told. It didn't glorify war. It didn't make soldiers into heroes. Instead, it showed war exactly as it was: brutal, senseless, and devastating. Mark had fought in World War I himself. He was wounded 5 times. He saw his friends die horrible deaths. He experienced the terror of artillery bombardments, poison gas attacks, and charges across no man's land into machine gun fire. When he came home, he couldn't forget what he'd seen, so he wrote it down. And he didn't hold anything back. The book follows a young German soldier named Paul and his classmates who volunteer for the army, filled with patriotic enthusiasm. Their teacher had given them passionate speeches about honor, glory, and duty to the fatherland. So they enlisted, expecting to become heroes. Instead, they found hell. Remarque described the reality of trench warfare: soldiers standing in mud for days, bodies rotting in the barbed wire between trenches, ends blown apart by artillery shells, men dying slowly from poison gas, their lungs dissolving. The constant fear and the way war turned young men into traumatized shells of themselves. One scene describes Paul watching a French soldier die slowly over hours in a shell crater. Paul had stabbed him, and now he can't escape the crater because of enemy fire. So he has to watch this man die, knowing he killed him, listening to him call for his wife and children. This wasn't heroic, this was horror. Another scene shows Paul coming home on leave. He can't connect with his family anymore. They still talk about the war in patriotic terms. They don't understand what it's really like. His old teacher still gives speeches about honor and glory. Paul knows the truth now. There's no glory in watching your friends die screaming. There's no honor in killing men who are just as trapped and scared as you are. The book showed that soldiers on both sides were victims. They weren't enemies because they hated each other. They were enemies because their governments told them to be. Young men on both sides were dying for old men's decisions and old men's pride. This message made governments very nervous. In Germany, when the Nazi Party came to power in 1933, All Quiet on the Western Front was one of the first books they banned. They threw copies into bonfires during their infamous book burnings. Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels specifically called out the book as dangerous and unpatriotic. Why did the Nazis hate this book so much? Because they were preparing for another war. They needed young men to volunteer to fight. They needed people to believe in glory and honor and national pride. But Remarque's book told young men the truth. War is hell, and the people who send you to fight don't care if you die. Nazis couldn't allow that message to spread, so they banned the book. They stripped Remarque of his German citizenship, his books were burned, his sister, who stayed in Germany, was later executed by the Nazis, partly as revenge against him. But Germany wasn't the only country that banned this book. Italy under Mussolini banned it. Austria banned it. Czechoslovakia banned it. Even some cities in the United States tried to ban it from libraries. Why would so many countries ban the same book? Because all of them had governments that might need to send young men to war again, and all of them knew that if young men read this book, they might refuse to go. The book revealed a truth that every government engaged in war tries to hide. Soldiers aren't heroes having adventures. They're human beings destroyed by violence and trauma. War doesn't make men great, it breaks them. And the glory and honor that governments talk about is a lie told to make young men willing to die. When a movie version was made in 1930, it caused riots in Germany. Nazi supporters attacked theaters showing it. The German government eventually banned the film. They couldn't allow people to see the reality of war depicted so honestly. Even decades later, this book remained controversial. During the Cold War, some American schools banned it, calling it anti-military propaganda. Some military families objected to their children reading it in schools, saying it disrespected soldiers. But here's what they missed. The book didn't disrespect soldiers. It showed the reality of what soldiers endure. It honored their experience by telling the truth instead of comfortable lies. Real disrespect was sending young men to die while lying to them about what war really means. All Quiet on the Western Front was banned because it revealed that governments lie about war. It showed that patriotic speeches and talk of glory are tools to manipulate young people into dying for political goals. It revealed that the people making decisions about war never have to experience war themselves. That truth was too dangerous. So they burned the books. Now let's talk about a book that exposed how governments manipulate and control entire populations. In 1949, George Orwell published a novel called 1984. You've probably heard of it. You might even think you know what it's about. But let me tell you why this book was banned in so many countries and why it's more relevant than ever. Orwell wrote this book as a warning. He'd seen totalitarianism rising in Europe. He had fought in the Spanish Civil War and seen how political movements could betray their own ideals. He understood how power corrupts and how governments use language, surveillance, and psychological manipulation to control people. 1984 takes place in a future dystopia where a government called the Party controls everything. They monitor everyone through telescreens that watch and listen constantly. They control all information and rewrite history whenever they want. They use propaganda to manipulate people's thoughts. They've even created a new language called Newspeak, designed to make certain thoughts impossible to express. The book's protagonist, Winston Smith, works at the Ministry of Truth, where his job is to rewrite old newspaper articles to match whatever the party currently claims is true. If the party says chocolate rations are increasing, Winston has to change old articles that said rations were higher before. The party's slogan is, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Here's what made this book truly dangerous. Orwell wasn't just imagining some far-off dystopia. He was describing techniques that real governments were actually using. The Soviet Union had been rewriting history for years. They airbrushed people out of photographs when they fell out of favor. They changed official records. They published encyclopedias with removable pages so when the party line changed, people could replace the old information with new, approved information. The book describes doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time and accept both. In the real world, Soviet citizens had to practice this constantly. They had to publicly praise the government while privately knowing it was corrupt. They had to claim to believe obvious lies because saying the truth was dangerous. The book's most famous scene involves torture and brainwashing. Winston is captured and tortured until he not only says whatever the party wants him to say, but actually believes it. In the final scene, he looks at an obvious lie and genuinely believes it because his spirit has been completely broken. When 1984 was published, the Soviet Union immediately banned it. They banned it in all Soviet territories and in all communist countries under Soviet influence. East Germany banned it. Czechoslovakia banned it. Poland banned it. China banned it. Why? Because the book revealed exactly how totalitarian governments operate. It showed the techniques they use to control people. It showed how they manipulated language, controlled information, used surveillance, and broke people's spirits. Soviet citizens who managed to read illegal copies recognized their own lives in the book. They saw the parallels immediately. Party slogans in the book, like "War is peace" and "Freedom is slavery," reminded them of Soviet propaganda. The concept of thought crime, where you could be arrested for your private thoughts, matched the reality of Soviet secret police encouraging people to report each other for wrong thinking. But here's the interesting part. It wasn't just communist countries that banned this book. In the 1950s, some school districts in the United States tried to ban it. Why? Because the book was also critical of capitalism and contained sexual content. Some conservative groups claimed it was pro-communist propaganda, completely missing the point that communist countries were banning it for being anti-communist. In the 1980s, it was challenged in schools in Florida and other states. Some said it was too dark for young people. Some said it was anti-government propaganda that might make students disrespect authority. What these censors revealed is exactly what Orwell was warning about. Governments and institutions don't want people to think too critically about power and control. They don't want people to recognize the techniques used to manipulate them. The book revealed several truths that made authorities uncomfortable. First, it showed that governments can and do lie systematically to their citizens. Second, it showed that surveillance can be used to control behavior even if no one is actively watching you all the time, because you never know when you're being observed. Third, it showed that language can be manipulated to make certain ideas harder to express or even think about. Think about how relevant this is today. Governments around the world use surveillance technology far beyond what Orwell imagined. They collect data on citizens' communications, movements, and activities. They use this data to monitor, predict, and influence behavior. Corporations do the same thing. They track everything you do online. They use psychological manipulation to influence your thoughts and behaviors. They create echo chambers where you only see information that reinforces what you already believe. Political movements on all sides use language manipulation. They redefine words to suit their purposes. They use euphemisms to hide uncomfortable truths. They create new terms to make certain ideas sound absurd without having to argue against them. 1984 revealed these techniques before they became as sophisticated as they are now. It gave people a framework to recognize and resist manipulation. That's why authoritarian governments banned it. That's why it's still challenged in schools today. The book's most important revelation is this: the greatest danger to freedom isn't always obvious oppression. It's the slow erosion of truth, the gradual acceptance of surveillance, the normalization of lies, and the willingness to let others do our thinking for us. Any government or institution that wants unchecked power fears this book because it teaches people to question authority and recognize manipulation. And that's exactly why everyone should read it. Let's shift now to a book that revealed the truth about America's role in a controversial war. In 1971, a massive collection of documents called the Pentagon Papers was leaked to the New York Times and Washington Post. These weren't really a book at first. They were a secret government study about American involvement in Vietnam. But when they were published as a book and released to the public, they revealed something shocking. The American government had been lying about the Vietnam War for years. Here's the background. The United States got involved in Vietnam in the 1950s and escalated its involvement throughout the 1960s. By the late 1960s, over 500,000 American troops were fighting in Vietnam. Thousands were dying. The war was costing billions of dollars. The government told the American people this war was necessary. They said they were fighting to stop communist expansion. They said they were winning. They said there was light at the end of the tunnel. Oh, just a little more time, a little more money, a few more troops, and victory would be theirs. But Daniel Ellsberg, who worked on the secret study, knew the truth. The study showed that every president since Truman had lied about Vietnam. He knew the war couldn't be won the way they were fighting it. They knew the South Vietnamese government was corrupt and unpopular. They knew American intervention was likely to fail. But they kept escalating anyway. Why? Because no president wanted to be the one to lose. They were willing to send young Americans to die rather than admit the war was a mistake. They were willing to destroy a country and kill millions of Vietnamese people rather than accept defeat. The Pentagon Papers showed that President Johnson had secretly expanded the war while publicly promising he wouldn't. They showed that the government had provoked attacks to justify escalation. They showed that military leaders privately doubted they could win while publicly claiming victory was near. Ellsberg decided the American people needed to know the truth, so he secretly copied thousands of pages of this classified study and gave them to newspapers. The government immediately tried to stop public. They went to court and got a temporary injunction. They claimed publishing this information would harm national security and help the enemy. But the newspapers fought back. They argued that the American people had a right to know their government was lying to them. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the newspapers. They said the government couldn't use prior restraint to stop publication just because the information was embarrassing or politically damaging. The Pentagon Papers were published. The revelations created a firestorm. Americans were outraged. They had been lied to for years. Their children and husbands and fathers had died in a war their own government knew was unwinnable. The government had destroyed families and traumatized a generation of soldiers for nothing. Trust in government collapsed. The Pentagon Papers contributed to President Nixon's downfall. They helped turn public opinion decisively against the war. They showed that the government would lie to its own people to protect political careers and avoid embarrassment. Now, the Pentagon Papers themselves weren't banned in the United States because the Supreme Court protected them. But the government tried desperately to suppress them, and in other countries, books containing or discussing the Pentagon Papers were censored or banned. What did the Pentagon Papers reveal that was so dangerous? They showed that democracy doesn't work if the government can lie to citizens about fundamental issues like war and peace. They showed that people in power will sacrifice others to protect themselves. They showed that national security can be used as an excuse to hide government crimes and mistakes. The government claimed that publishing this information would help the enemy and harm national security. But the real harm was to the government's credibility. The enemy didn't learn anything from the Pentagon Papers they didn't already know. But the American people learned that their government had been lying to them. This revelation changed American society. It made people more skeptical of government claims. It made journalists more willing to investigate and challenge official narratives. It showed that whistleblowers and a free press are essential to democracy. The Pentagon Papers revealed a truth that every government fears. If people know they're being lied to, they might stop believing anything the government says. They might start asking questions. They might demand accountability. They might refuse to let their children die in wars based on lies. That's why the government fought so hard to suppress this information. Not because it helped the enemy, but because it revealed government deception to the people. Now let's talk about a book that exposed terrible medical experiments on unwilling human subjects. In the 1970s, investigative journalist Eileen Wellsome started researching a disturbing story. During the Cold War, the American government had secretly injected people with plutonium to study the effects of radiation. These people didn't know what was being done to them. They didn't consent. They were human guinea pigs. Her research led to the publication of the Plutonium Files in 1999. The book revealed decades of secret radiation experiments on American citizens, prisoners, hospital patients, pregnant women, and even children. Let me explain what happened. During World War II and the Cold War, the United States was developing nuclear weapons. Scientists wanted to know what radiation did to the human body, so they conducted experiments. In some cases, they injected people with radioactive materials. Hospital patients who came in for treatment were secretly given plutonium or other radioactive substances. Doctors would tell them they were receiving a new treatment, but really were being used in experiments to see how radiation moved through the human body and what damage it caused. In other cases, they fed radioactive materials to mentally disabled children at a school in Massachusetts. They told the parents and the children it was a special nutrition study. They mixed radioactive iron and calcium into the children's breakfast cereal and milk. They also exposed prisoners to high doses of radiation to see the effects on testicles. They exposed soldiers to radiation during nuclear tests. They sprayed entire cities with radioactive particles to study how fallout would spread. San Francisco, Minneapolis, and St. Louis were all used as testing sites without telling the residents. People conducting these experiments didn't see anything wrong with what they were doing. They thought it was necessary for national security. They thought understanding radiation was important for winning the Cold War. The subjects were mostly poor people, minorities, prisoners, and disabled individuals. People whose lives the experimenters apparently didn't value very much. But here's the key thing. They knew it was wrong enough to hide it. They classified everything. They used code names. They kept it secret for decades. If they truly believed these experiments were ethical and necessary, why hide them? When Wellsome's book came out, it caused a scandal. President Clinton ordered an investigation. A committee found that thousands of people had been used in radiation experiments without their knowledge or consent. Some had died because of the experiments. The others had suffered health problems. The government was forced to apologize. They paid compensation to some victims and their families. They admitted that these experiments violated medical ethics and human rights. But here's what's disturbing. Before this book came out, most of this information was classified. If you tried to research it or write about it, you would be blocked. Government agencies would refuse to release documents. They would claim national security. The book revealed that the American government, which criticized other countries for human rights abuses, had conducted its own atrocities. They had treated their own citizens as expendable test subjects. They had violated the Nuremberg Code, which was created after World War II, to prevent the kind of human experimentation the Nazis had done. This revelation was deeply embarrassing to the government. It showed that American exceptionalism, the idea that America is morally superior to other nations, was at least partially a myth. American scientists had done things that weren't that different from what Nazi doctors did, and for similar reasons, they prioritized scientific knowledge and national security over human rights and dignity. The book was never officially banned in the United States, but the information in it had been suppressed for decades through classification. The government had effectively banned this knowledge by making it secret and punishing anyone who tried to reveal it. Why was this information suppressed for so long? Because it revealed that governments will harm their own citizens if they think they can get away with it. It revealed that national security can be used to justify almost any atrocity. It revealed that the people in power don't see everyone as equally human. The plutonium files showed that consent and ethics are often ignored when dealing with vulnerable populations. The subjects of these experiments were chosen because they had little power to resist or seek justice. They were poor, imprisoned, disabled, or otherwise marginalized. This truth is dangerous because it makes people question what else their government might be doing in secret. If they did this, what else might they be hiding? Experiments might still be going on. What other rights might be violated in the name of national security? That's why this information was kept secret for so long, and that's why books like this are so important. They force governments to confront their crimes and, hopefully, prevent future abuses. Let's move to a book that revealed how corporations poison people for profit. In 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, a book about pesticides and their effects on the environment. The chemical industry immediately attacked her. They tried to discredit her. They tried to suppress her book. They tried to silence her. Why? Because she revealed a truth that threatened billions of dollars in profits. The chemicals they were selling as safe were actually poisoning the environment and killing people. Here's the story. After World War II, chemical companies started producing pesticides on a massive scale. The most famous was DDT. During the war, DDT had been used to kill mosquitoes and other insects that spread disease among troops. It seems like a miracle chemical. After the war, these companies wanted to keep making money from these chemicals, so they marketed them to farmers and homeowners. They said these pesticides were safe and effective. They said they would eliminate pests and increase crop yields. They sprayed them everywhere, on crops, in forests, in neighborhoods, even directly on children to kill lice. But Rachel Carson, a marine biologist, started noticing something disturbing. Bird populations were declining dramatically. In some areas, birds were disappearing entirely. Spring was becoming silent because there were no birds left to sing. She investigated and found that pesticides like DDT were building up in the environment and in animals' bodies. Birds were eating insects contaminated with pesticides. The chemicals were causing the birds' eggshells to become so thin they broke before the chicks could hatch. Entire species were being wiped out. But it wasn't just birds. Carson found evidence that these chemicals were harming all kinds of wildlife. They were contaminating water supplies. They were building up in fish that people ate, and they were likely harming people too, possibly causing cancer and other diseases. She wrote all of this in Silent Spring. The book explained in clear language that the chemical industry had been lying. Their products weren't safe. They were poisoning the entire planet. The chemical industry panicked. They had been making huge profits from these pesticides. If people stopped buying them, the industry would lose billions of dollars. So they launched a massive campaign to discredit Carson and her book. They attacked her credentials. They called her a hysterical woman who didn't understand science, even though she had a master's degree in zoology and had worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for years. They claimed her research was flawed and biased. They said she was a tool of communist sympathizers who wanted to hurt American agriculture. Chemical companies tried to pressure Carson's publisher not to release the book. When that failed, they published their own reports claiming pesticides were safe. They bought advertisements in magazines attacking her. They sent letters to scientists and politicians trying to turn them against her. Government agencies that were closely tied to the chemical industry also opposed her. The Department of Agriculture had been promoting the use of pesticides and didn't want to admit they might be harmful. But Carson had done her research carefully. Her book was thoroughly documented with hundreds of scientific sources. Scientists who reviewed her work honestly found it accurate, and the public was ready to listen. Silent Spring became a bestseller. It sparked a national conversation about environmental protection, led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. It eventually led to DDT being banned in the United States. The chemical industry kept fighting. In some countries, books about pesticide dangers were suppressed or banned, especially in places where chemical companies had strong influence over the government. Even in the United States, there were efforts to keep the book out of schools and libraries. Why did they fight so hard to suppress this information? Because Carson revealed that corporations will poison people for profit. She showed that the chemical industry knew or should have known that their products were harmful but sold them anyway. She revealed that industry-funded science often can't be trusted because it's designed to protect profits, not public health. The book also revealed a larger truth. Environmental damage affects everyone. You can't poison nature without poisoning yourself. The chemicals we spray on crops end up in our water and our food and our bodies. We're all connected to the environment, and destroying it means destroying ourselves. This truth threatened not just the pesticide industry, but any industry that profited from polluting the environment. If people started questioning whether DDT was safe, they might start questioning other chemicals, other products, other industrial practices. Silent Spring revealed that progress and technology aren't always good. Sometimes what seems like an advancement is actually a disaster we just haven't recognized yet. It taught people to question corporate claims about safety and to demand independent verification. Attempts to suppress this book ultimately failed, but the tactics used against Carson, attacking her credibility, funding counter-research, using political pressure, are still used today whenever someone reveals inconvenient truths about corporate harm. The book was dangerous because it empowered ordinary people to question powerful industries and demand change. And that's exactly why those industries tried so hard to silence it. Now let's talk about a book that revealed the reality of slavery in a way that changed history. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel about slavery in the American South. It became the best-selling novel of the 19th century. It convinced millions of people that slavery was evil. It was banned across the entire southern United States. Before this book, many people in the North had only vague ideas about what slavery was really like. They knew it existed, but they didn't think much about it. It was a distant problem, something happening far away that didn't affect them. Stowe changed that. She wrote a story that made slavery personal and real. The book follows several enslaved people and shows their suffering in detail. It shows families being torn apart when children are sold away from their parents. It shows the brutality of beatings and torture. It shows how slavery corrupts everyone involved, turning even otherwise decent people into monsters. The main character, Uncle Tom, is a deeply religious man who tries to maintain his dignity and humanity despite being enslaved. The book shows him being sold multiple times, torn away from his wife and children, and eventually beaten to death by a cruel master. But the book isn't just about Tom. It shows other enslaved people fighting for freedom in different ways. Eliza escapes across a frozen river carrying her child to keep her baby from being sold. George Harris fights back against his enslavers and eventually escapes to freedom. What made this book so powerful was that Stowe didn't just describe slavery as a political or economic issue. She made readers feel it emotionally. She made them imagine their own children being sold away. She made them feel the pain and fear and desperation of enslaved people. The book became a phenomenon in the North. People who had never thought much about slavery were suddenly outraged by it. The book convinced many people that slavery wasn't just wrong, it was evil, and it had to be abolished. But in the South, the reaction was very different. The book was immediately banned. Possessing a copy could get you in serious trouble. Some places made it illegal to own the book or even to talk about it. Why did the South ban this book so aggressively? Because it threatened the entire basis of Southern society. The South's economy depended on slavery. Plantation owners made their fortunes from the unpaid labor of enslaved people. But to maintain this system, they needed to convince themselves and others that slavery was acceptable, maybe even good. Southern society had created elaborate justifications for slavery. They claimed black people were inferior and couldn't take care of themselves. They said slavery was actually beneficial, that enslaved people were better off than they would be if they were free. They said they were kind masters who treated their slaves well. Uncle Tom's Cabin destroyed these justifications. It showed that slavery was inherently cruel and dehumanizing. It showed that enslaved people were fully human, with the same feelings and desires and capabilities as white people. It showed that even kind masters participated in an evil. The book revealed the truth that Southern society was built on. All the wealth, all the plantations, all the Southern lifestyle depended on the brutal exploitation of human beings. Every wealthy Southern family owed their status to stolen labor and stolen lives. This truth was so threatening that the book had to be suppressed. If people in the South read it and believed it, the entire system might collapse. If enslaved people read it, they might be inspired to resist or escape. If poor white people read it, they might question why they were defending a system that mainly benefited wealthy plantation owners. So the book was banned. People caught with copies were punished. The book was denounced from pulpits and in newspapers. Southern writers produced response novels trying to show slavery in a positive light, but none had anywhere near the impact of Uncle Tom's Cabin. The book contributed to the growing divide between North and South that eventually led to the Civil War. When Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe during the war, he reportedly said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." That might be an exaggeration, but the book certainly helped turn Northern public opinion decisively against slavery. It made slavery a moral issue that couldn't be ignored or compromised on. Uncle Tom's Cabin revealed several dangerous truths. First, that an economic system can be evil no matter how profitable it is. Second, that people will create elaborate justifications for cruelty if their wealth depends on it. Third, that the humanity of oppressed people can't be denied forever, even when powerful people benefit from denying it. The book was banned because it made it impossible to maintain comfortable lies about slavery. It forced people to confront the reality of what slavery meant. Human beings treated as property, families destroyed, lives stolen, suffering inflicted for profit. Even after slavery ended, this book remained controversial. In the 20th century, some criticized it for its portrayal of Uncle Tom as too passive and submissive. Others defended it as a product of its time that still served an important purpose in ending slavery. But the fact remains, this book revealed a truth so powerful that an entire region had to ban it. It showed that stories and books can change minds and change history, and it proved that those who benefit from injustice will always try to suppress the truth about that injustice. Let's move now to a book that revealed the truth about dictatorships and totalitarian control. In 1945, George Orwell published Animal Farm, a short novel that has been banned in more countries than almost any other book in history. It's been banned in the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, and many other countries. Even today, it's still banned in some places. On the surface, Animal Farm is a simple story about farm animals who rebel against their human owner. The animals, led by the pigs, drive out the farmer and take over the farm. They establish their own society based on equality and cooperation. All animals are equal, they declare, but gradually, the pigs start taking more power. They start changing the rules. They start living in the farmer's house and sleeping in beds. They start walking on two legs like humans. And they change their main rule to, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. In the end, the pigs have become just as oppressive as the humans they overthrew. The other animals are worse off than they were before the revolution. The dream of equality and freedom has been completely betrayed. This seems like a simple fable, a children's story about talking animals. So why has it been banned in so many countries? Because it's not really about animals, it's about the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union. Orwell wrote this book as a criticism of how the Russian Revolution, which started with ideals of equality and justice, turned into a totalitarian dictatorship under Stalin. Each character in the book represents real historical figures or groups. The pig Napoleon represents Stalin, the pig Snowball represents Trotsky, Stalin's rival who was exiled and later assassinated. The other animals represent the Russian people who were promised freedom and equality, but ended up oppressed under a new system that was arguably worse than what they had before. The book shows exactly how revolutions can be betrayed. The pigs gradually consolidate power by controlling information, rewriting history, using propaganda, creating fear through violence, and manipulating language to make their oppression seem reasonable. For example, when the pigs start sleeping in beds, which was supposed to be forbidden, they changed the rule. It used to say, no animal shall sleep in a bed. Now it says, no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. They claim it always said that, and most animals' memories are hazy enough that they believe it. This mirrors how the Soviet Union constantly rewrote history to match current party positions. Soviet encyclopedias had removable pages, so when someone fell out of favor, you could replace the pages about them with new approved information. The book shows how totalitarian regimes use language to control thought. The pigs reduce all rules to simple slogans that the other animals repeat without thinking. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad becomes a chant that stops critical thinking. This mirrors real totalitarian propaganda that reduces complex issues to simple slogans so people stop thinking critically and just repeat what they're told. When Animal Farm was published, Orwell had trouble finding a publisher because the Soviet Union was a British ally in World War II. Publishers didn't want to offend them. Finally, one publisher took the risk, and the book became a huge success in the West. But in the Soviet Union and other communist countries, it was immediately banned. Possessing a copy could get you arrested and sent to a labor camp. The book was too dangerous because it revealed exactly how communist revolutions had been betrayed. Soviet citizens who managed to read illegal copies recognized their own society in the book. They saw how their revolution had promised freedom and equality but delivered dictatorship and poverty. They saw how their leaders lived in luxury while ordinary people struggled. They saw how history was rewritten and lies became official truth. The book revealed several dangerous truths about totalitarian systems. First, revolutions can be hijacked by people seeking power, not justice. Second, idealistic movements can become corrupt when leaders prioritize their own power over their stated ideals. Third, propaganda and control of information are essential tools of oppression. But here's what's really interesting. The book wasn't just banned in communist countries. Some American schools also challenged or banned it, especially during the 1950s and 1960s. Conservative groups sometimes objected to it because it portrayed a revolution, even a failed one, and they worried it might inspire revolutionary thinking. Some school districts banned it for being pro-communist, completely missing that it was actually anti-totalitarian and specifically critical of the Soviet Union. Others objected to it for being too political for children or for containing negative portrayals of authority. They didn't like that it showed how leaders could betray the people who trusted them. What all these banning attempts reveal is that Animal Farm threatens any form of authoritarianism, whether communist or otherwise. It teaches people to question leaders who claim to have their best interests at heart. It shows how power corrupts and how noble ideals can be twisted to justify oppression. The book's most important revelation is that tyranny doesn't always announce itself as tyranny. It often comes disguised as liberation, promises to make things better, but gradually makes them worse. And it happens so slowly, with so many small changes and justifications that people don't realize what's happening until it's too late. This truth threatens any government or movement that wants unquestioned authority. That's why it's been banned in so many places and for so many different reasons. The book teaches people to think critically about power, and critical thinking is dangerous to anyone who wants absolute control. Finally, let's talk about a book that revealed dangerous truths about power, violence, and revolution. The autobiography of Malcolm X, published in 1965, told the story of Malcolm Little, who became Malcolm X, one of the most controversial, influential civil rights leaders in American history. The book was immediately controversial. Some cities tried to keep it out of schools and libraries. Some called it dangerous propaganda. Some said it promoted violence and hatred. Even today, it's still challenged in schools. Why? Because Malcolm X told a truth that made white America very uncomfortable. He said that oppressed people have a right to defend themselves by any means necessary. Malcolm X grew up experiencing extreme racism. His father was killed, probably by white supremacists. His mother was institutionalized. He was told by teachers that his dream of becoming a lawyer was unrealistic for a black person. He turned to crime and ended up in prison. In prison, he educated himself and joined the Nation of Islam, a black Muslim organization. When he got out, he became a powerful speaker and leader, but his message was different from other civil rights leaders. While Martin Luther King Jr. preached nonviolent resistance, Malcolm X said that black people had a right to defend themselves against violence, even if that meant using violence themselves. He criticized King's approach as too passive, too willing to accept abuse. Malcolm X also criticized white liberals who claimed to support civil rights but didn't actually do enough to help. He said integration wasn't the solution if it just meant black people being accepted into a fundamentally unjust system. He argued that black people needed economic independence and self-determination, not just legal equality. The autobiography doesn't hide any. It presents Malcolm X's views honestly, including views that made many people uncomfortable. It talks about his anger at white supremacy. It discusses his evolving views on race, violence, and justice. What made this book so dangerous was that it gave voice to Black anger and frustration in a way that white America couldn't ignore or dismiss. Malcolm X didn't ask for white approval. He didn't moderate his message to make white people comfortable. He spoke truth about racism and oppression, and he didn't apologize for being angry about it. The book revealed several uncomfortable truths. First, that nonviolence is a choice, not an obligation, and oppressed people aren't required to accept abuse peacefully. Second, that legal equality isn't enough if economic and social inequality continue. Third, that many white people who claim to oppose racism still benefit from and perpetuate racist systems. But the book also shows Malcolm X's evolution. Toward the end of his life, after leaving the Nation of Islam and making a pilgrimage to Mecca, his views became more nuanced. He started believing that racial harmony might be possible if people of all races genuinely committed to justice and equality. This complexity made the book even more powerful. It wasn't just angry rhetoric. It was the story of a man grappling with profound questions about justice, identity, and how to resist oppression effectively. Schools tried to ban this book because they said it promoted violence and racial hatred. But that's not what the book does. The book tells a true story about a real person's response to real oppression. Malcolm X wasn't promoting violence for its own sake. He was saying that people have a right to defend themselves and that demanding people accept abuse nonviolently is itself a form of oppression. The book revealed that the civil rights movement wasn't monolithic. Not all Black leaders agreed on tactics or goals. Some believed in working within the system. Others believed the system itself needed to be overthrown. Some believed in integration. Others believed in Black nationalism and self-determination. This diversity of thought threatened the comfortable narrative that white America preferred, where civil rights was just about a few legal changes and everyone holding hands and singing together. Malcolm X showed that the struggle was deeper, more radical, and more threatening to existing power structures. The attempts to ban this book revealed that people in power fear honest discussions about oppression and resistance. They're comfortable with carefully managed civil rights narratives that don't threaten fundamental structures of power, but they're deeply uncomfortable with voices that question those structures and demand more radical change. The book also revealed the power of education and self-transformation. Malcolm X educated himself in prison. He read voraciously. He developed his own thinking and his own voice. The book shows that education is liberating, and that those who control education control people's ability to think critically and resist oppression. That's why this book has been challenged in schools. Not because it promotes violence, but because it promotes critical thinking about race, power, and justice. It teaches young people to question authority and to recognize it. It shows them that accepting injustice isn't the only option. Even decades after publication, this book remains controversial. Some schools still try to keep it away from students. Some parents object to their children reading it, but the book continues to be read and to inspire new generations to think critically about justice and resistance. So there you have it. 10 books that were banned for revealing too much. Each one exposed truths that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Each one threatened systems of power and control. Each one showed that books can be dangerous, not because they promote violence or hatred, but because they promote truth and critical thinking. These books revealed government lies, war crimes, totalitarian control, corporate harm, human rights abuses, and the realities of oppression. They showed that those in power will go to great lengths to suppress information that threatens their authority or profits. But here's the thing about truth. You can ban books, but you can't kill ideas. Every attempt to suppress these books just proved how powerful they were. Every government that burned them or banned them just showed how much they feared informed citizens. These books changed history. They inspired movements, ended wars, toppled governments, and transformed how we think about power, justice, and human rights. They prove that the pen is mightier than the sword, that ideas can defeat armies, and that truth, no matter how inconvenient, will eventually come out. The banning of these books teaches us something important. When someone tries to stop you from reading something, that's often a sign you should read it. When information is suppressed, that's when you should question why. What truth are they afraid of? What don't they want you to know? Every banned book is an invitation to think critically. Every attempt at censorship is an admission that ideas have power. Every person who reads a banned book is exercising one of the most important freedoms, the freedom to think for yourself. These 10 books were banned because they revealed too much. They pulled back the curtain on power and showed the machinery behind it. They exposed lies, crimes, and abuses that authorities wanted hidden. They gave voice to the oppressed and challenged the comfortable narratives of the powerful. And that's exactly why we should read them. Not to be rebellious for its own sake, but because understanding these truths makes us better citizens, better thinkers, and better human beings. These books teach us to question authority, to demand evidence, to recognize manipulation, and to stand up for truth even when it's uncomfortable or dangerous. Real danger isn't in reading these books. The real danger is in remaining ignorant, in accepting whatever we're told, in never questioning the stories told by those in power. The real danger is forgetting that freedom depends on access to information and the courage to seek truth. These books were banned because truth is powerful. They remain important because truth is still powerful, and they'll continue to be read because people will always hunger for truth, no matter how many times those in power try to hide it. That's the legacy of banned books. They remind us that knowledge is freedom, ignorance is slavery, and the fight for truth never ends. Every generation must rediscover these books and these truths for themselves. Every generation must resist censorship and demand the freedom to read, think, and decide. So read banned books. Question why they were banned. Think about what truths they reveal, and remember that every attempt to silence truth just proves how important truth is. Because in the end, books may be burned and banned and suppressed, but ideas can't be destroyed. Truth can't be permanently hidden. And as long as people keep reading, keep thinking, and keep questioning, the power of these books will endure. Think about what we've learned from these 10 books. We learned that governments lie about war and send young people to die while knowing the war can't be won. We learned that democracies can spy on their own citizens and treat constitutional rights as obstacles to power. We learned that corporations will poison the planet for profit and attack anyone who reveals it. We learned that medical experiments can be conducted on unwilling subjects if those subjects are poor or powerless. We learned that revolutions can be betrayed by the very people who led them. But we also learned something more important. We learned that truth is resilient. Every one of these books was banned, suppressed, or attacked. Authors were exiled, threatened, or killed. Publishers were pressured. Readers were punished. But the books survived. The truth got out. That truth changed the world. Solzhenitsyn's books helped bring down the Soviet Union. The Pentagon Papers helped end the Vietnam War. Silent Spring helped create the environmental movement. Uncle Tom's Cabin helped end. These books had real impact because truth has power. But here's what's important to understand. These books didn't change the world by themselves. They changed the world because people read them, discussed them, shared them, and acted on the truths they revealed. Books are just paper and ink. Ideas are just words. They only have power when people choose to embrace them and act on them. That's why censorship is ultimately futile. You can ban a book, but if people want to read it, they'll find a way. You can burn books, but people will remember what they said. You can exile authors, but their words will live on. The Soviet Union banned Solzhenitsyn's books for decades, but people still read them in secret, copied them by hand, memorized passages, and passed them on. Truth has a way of surviving because people need truth. We need to understand the world as it really is, not as powerful people want us to believe it is. We need to know when we're being lied to, manipulated, or oppressed. We need information to make informed decisions about our lives and our society. That's why freedom of speech and freedom of the press are so fundamental to democracy. Not because all speech is valuable, but because censorship is the tool of tyrants. When someone tries to stop you from reading something, they're not protecting you. They're protecting themselves from accountability. Every book we've discussed today was banned because it threatened someone's power or profit or privilege. The truth these books revealed was inconvenient for those in charge. It exposed their crimes, their lies, their corruption. So they tried to suppress it. But censorship backfires. When you ban a book, you draw attention to it. People want to know why it's banned. They want to read it for themselves. The banned book becomes more interesting, more powerful, more influential than it might have been otherwise. The irony is that by banning these books, authorities proved that the books were telling the truth. If the books were lying or exaggerating, The easiest response would be to debunk them, to provide evidence that they're wrong. But when you can't refute the truth, when the facts are against you, censorship becomes the only option. This pattern continues today. Around the world, books are still banned, journalists are still imprisoned, whistleblowers are still prosecuted. The specific books and topics change, but the fundamental dynamic remains the same. Those with power try to control information to protect that power. That's why we need to remain vigilant. We need to question why certain information is restricted. We need to push back against censorship in all its forms. We need to support journalists, researchers, and writers who risk their careers or lives to reveal important truths. We also need to recognize that censorship isn't always obvious. It's not always book burnings and government bans. Sometimes it's more subtle. Algorithms can suppress certain information. Search engines can bury results. Social media platforms can ban accounts. Economic pressure can silence critics. Lawsuits can intimidate publishers. The digital age has created new forms of censorship alongside new forms of freedom. On one hand, it's easier than ever to share information globally. On the other hand, a few large companies control most of the platforms where information is shared, giving them enormous power to decide what people see and don't see. This makes the lessons from these banned books more relevant than ever. We need to think critically about information. We need to seek out multiple sources. We need to question narratives, especially when they come from those in power. We need to recognize propaganda and manipulation. The books we've discussed today teach us how to do this. They show us what government propaganda looks like. They show us how corporations manipulate science and public opinion. They show us how totalitarian systems control information and thought. They show us the importance of free speech and a free press. These aren't just historical lessons. They're practical skills for navigating the modern world. Every day we're bombarded with information. Some of it is true, some is false, some is misleading. We need to be able to sort through it, to recognize manipulation, to find truth. Reading banned books is one way to develop these skills. These books were banned because they challenged official narratives and revealed uncomfortable truths. Reading them trains us to think critically, to question authority, to recognize when we're being lied to. Beyond the practical benefits, there's a moral dimension. Reading banned books is an act of resistance. It's a refusal to let others decide what we can and can't know. It's an assertion of our fundamental right to seek truth and form our own opinions. Every person who reads a banned book honors the courage of the people who wrote them, published them, smuggled them, and preserved them. Many people risked everything to get these truths out. The least we can do is read them and learn from them. And we need to pass these lessons on. We need to teach young people about these books and why they were banned. We need to help them understand that freedom of thought and expression aren't guaranteed. They have to be defended in every generation, because the same forces that banned these books still exist. The desire to control information, to suppress dissent, to hide uncomfortable truths hasn't gone away. It's just adapted to new times and new technologies. Governments still classify documents to hide their corporations still attack scientists who reveal inconvenient truths about their products. Powerful people still try to silence critics. The specifics change, but the pattern continues. That's why these 10 books matter. They're not just historical artifacts, they're warnings and guidebooks. They show us how power operates, how truth is suppressed, and how brave individuals can challenge that suppression. Remind us that we have a responsibility to seek truth, to think critically, and to speak up against injustice. They show us that ordinary people armed with truth and courage can change the world. The authors of these books were ordinary people too. Solzhenitsyn was a soldier. Carson was a biologist. Harriet Beecher Stowe was a housewife and teacher. They didn't have special powers. They just had truth and the courage to share it. That's what these books ultimately teach us, that we all have that potential. We can all seek truth. We can all question authority. We can all resist censorship and manipulation. We can all make a difference, but only if we choose to. Only if we read, think, question, and act. Only if we refuse to accept comfortable lies and insist on uncomfortable truths. These 10 books were banned for revealing too much, but there's no such thing as too much truth. Truth is freedom. Ignorance is slavery. The choice between them is ours to make.